Also, you can get it, the newspaper, right at your stoop or online at stltoday.com. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly. How is everybody today?
Good. So last week or a couple weeks ago, you did a story about being arrested for being poor, and it was a pretty interesting story. You're now back with part two, which is even more disturbing than the first one you talked about.
Yeah, what's happening in a lot of rural counties all throughout Missouri is very similar to what we're used to here in St. Louis, what we reported on a lot back in 2014 and 2015 related to the municipal courts throughout St. Louis County. Only what's happening in rural Missouri is worse. Basically, people are getting arrested for small offenses. The one of the women that I've written about, actually two of the different women that I've written about related to this case, both in Dent County, got arrested for shoplifting makeup. And you know, I'm not condoning shoplifting, but in one case, it was $24 worth of nail polish, and in another case, it was literally an $8 tube of mascara. They get arrested. They actually get jailed rather than just issued a summons because the judge sets bail. They can't afford bail, so they're in jail. They're poor. They're there for a period of time, sometimes 30 days or longer, before they can get a public defender, get a bond hearing, whatever. They end up pleading guilty to something, and maybe they only get probation or they get time served. So they did 30 days in jail for their shoplifting, which isn't necessarily unreasonable if that's the standard you set in your community. But then this is what happens. The county sends them a bill for their time in jail, and it's about $50 a day. These are people that couldn't afford a small amount of bail, a couple $1,000 to get out of bail. Now they've got this bill for several $100s or a couple of $1,000s for their time in jail. And then the judge sets a monthly hearing called a show cause hearing. Come in and show me that you're paying your bill or that you've paid down enough of your bill. Sometimes they miss one of those hearings. Sometimes they show up and they say, sorry, Judge, I don't have any money. I haven't been able to pay. The judge then puts them in jail for a probation violation. The woman that I wrote about this last week, Brooke Bergen, did a year in jail after her $8 shoplifting charge because she fell behind paying her jail bill. Her jail bill now, I wrote in the column, is more than $10,000. I was Facebooking with her last night. It's $18,000 now. She's got to go to court again in November to show the judge, sorry, I haven't been able to make payments on it. You keep taking me away from my kids and away from my job, and then you give me an extra bill when I go to jail. She may get sent to jail again, and that $18,000 bill becomes something else. She hadn't committed any other crimes since then. It is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen. It is purely a debtor's prison, and it's happening. I've written about it in St. Francis County. It's happening in Dent County. It's happening in Crawford County. It's happening all over the state. And this is a massive problem for the Missouri judiciary.
Tony, I thought you mentioned debtor's prison. We all learned about it in high school. It was illegal. How can this still be legal in the state of Missouri?
Because what they're arguing is that the jail bill, they call it a board bill. The board bill, they're arguing, and the public defender's office is before the appeals court, all three appeals courts in the state, saying that this is constitutional. What these county judges are arguing is that the board bill is part of the fine and court costs. And so they're arguing that these people, because they aren't paying their fine, they haven't fulfilled the original sentence. So the judge is arguing this isn't debtor's prison. I'm not putting them in jail because they're poor. I'm not putting them in jail because they can't pay a debt. I'm putting them in jail because they haven't fulfilled their probation. That's the argument. I think it fails on its surface. At least one appeals court has already ruled that you can't keep adding these court costs onto cases and then put people in jail. The judges wrote that it creates this endless merry-go-round that poor people in these rural counties are having to deal with. And ultimately, I think the Missouri Supreme Court is going to have to not only rule on these cases, to tell these judges you can't do this anymore, you're going to have the Supreme Court issue some new rules and some guidance so these judges know this is not a reasonable practice. And then once the counties realize they can't fund themselves on the backs of poor people, you're going to have to face some of the same questions we're facing here in St. Louis County. Does every one of the 114 counties in the state need their own courthouse, need their own, judicial system, or do we need to start talking about some form of judicial consolidation so that the initial courts that people are dealing with in our society are run with the same sort of professionalism and expectation that we'd like to see in all of our judicial systems.
Tony, this is an amazing story of this one woman. How do we know it just isn't this one woman? Any more evidence of this being widespread, happening to scores of people?
It's completely widespread. I've been emailing with public defenders all over the state, and I will be writing about this nonstop for a period of time. There are all sorts of cases, and every time I find one, I get 3 or 4 more calls from others. I'm working on cases in Franklin County, St. Francis County, Dent County, Crawford County, down in southwest Missouri. It is widespread, and there are a few judges that have been identified as sort of the worst offenders, but it is something that is happening in lots of rural counties all over Missouri.
Huh. Is it working its way to the Supreme Court, or are you just saying that it is?
There are 3 cases right now before the 3 appeals courts in the state, Eastern, Southern, and Western, affecting different parts of the state. And those 3 cases are all brought by Matthew Mueller, who works for the state public defender, and they're cases on behalf of poor people who got minor charges but then ended up doing larger jail time because they couldn't afford to pay the jail bill. And they're asking the court to declare that practice unlawful.
All right, Tony, we got a text message here on the line. They're saying that these are state cases and state charges, not the county charges.
Correct. These are, and one of my columns explained why. The reason that the county wants these people convicted on state charges is because if they're holding them in their jail on state charges, they get reimbursement from the state, which means you and I, our tax dollars, are paying for this. And so they're double dipping. Here's what happens. The county bills the state because any state charge that you're holding somebody in your county jail on, the state reimburses. It's about $22 a day. But then they go ahead and bill the poor person who was stuck in jail the full $50 a day as well. And so these counties are double dipping, and it's costing taxpayers from all over the state lots of money.
Wow. Good stuff, Tony. STLtoday.com, also your hometown newspaper. Tony, every Tuesday and Thursday with us. Good stuff. Have a good weekend, Tony.
Good to talk to you.
All right.